Good morning. I'm Marilyn Chandler, and I'm here interviewing Joel Liebling, along with Stacy Krim and Kate Mazer. Today is Monday, June 23rd, and this is the project of UNCG, School of History, Jewish Community Studies, Jewish Studies, the UNCG Library, and the Greensboro Jewish Community. My name is Marilyn Chandler, and we're going to begin, and we're here interviewing Joel Liebling. Good morning.
Good morning, Marilyn. It's a pleasure to have you all here, and I'm flattered that you're interviewing me. I will tell you a little about myself, and I'll pretty much follow the form you suggested. I have to say at the outset that I am not an intellect. I don't bring any great thoughts to this group or in general, but over the course of the years, I've simply worked very hard and very conscientious. I'm 94 years old. Following the form, that was submitted to me.
And Joel, if you'd like, I can ask you also.
Yes, by all means, ask me whatever questions you'd like. My father was born in Austria in the 1860s. He came to this country, and my father was the fourth child born in New York. He was born in 1899. My grandfather, as I understand it, was a tailor. That's on my father's side. My father's name was Joel. I'm named after him. I have a cousin who's deceased now who was also named after Joel, named after my father's father, and a third cousin who was named Joseph. So the name Joel or Joseph is strong in our family. I was born in 1931 in Washington, D.C. My father worked in Tom McCann's shoe store. He was the manager of a store in downtown Washington. My mother was from New Haven, Connecticut, where she grew up with 6 brothers and sisters. She had 3 sisters and 3 brothers, I think. Yes, 3 brothers in New Haven. I know little about my father's background. He died early on in 1942, shortly after Pearl Harbor. He died actually in April 15th of 1942. I remember on Pearl Harbor Day in 1941, we drove over to the Japanese embassy in the car, and we couldn't get within 2 blocks of it because it was roped off. That was the beginning of the Second World War, and that's the last thing I remember about my father. We then moved to New Haven, Connecticut, which was my mother's hometown, and we moved in and lived with my grandparents. My grandmother was not literate. My grandmother originally was from Austria. My grandfather was from Russia, and he started out as a peddler of fruits. And I know when I got to know him when I was 11 years old, when I moved to New Haven, he was in the real estate business. So my sister, who was a few years younger than I, grew up living with my mother and with my grandparents in New Haven, Connecticut. New Haven, Connecticut was a city at that point where the first generation of Jewish people were very much in evidence. There was what I would call a Jewish section of town, and that was where the bagel bakeries were and the delicatessens and all that. It was actually known as Oak Street. And we used to go there every once in a while to go shopping and so forth. Okay. I had a sister I mentioned who was a few years younger than I am, who is still living and lives in New Jersey. Grew up in New Haven. New Haven at that point in time had the largest, the percent of it, the Italian people comprised a very large percentage of the people in town. As a matter of fact, on a per percentage basis, there were more Italian people in New Haven at that time than any city in the country. There were a lot of Irish people, and there was a large Jewish community. It was a good town to grow up in. I went to a high school called Hill House High School. New Haven was heavily impacted in a positive way by Yale University. Yale always had activities going on, football games and baseball games and so on and so forth, that we all very religiously, well, when we could attend them, we did, but it was a very strong thing. Let me take a step back to Washington, D.C. It was in Washington, D.C. when we moved to a new location from an apartment house that I first incurred or heard anything about my being Jewish. I was told by the people, by the twin boys that lived next door to me, whose last name was Norton, that the previous people who had lived there told them to hate Jews. That was the first time I had ever heard anything like that. At that time, and I must have been 8 or 9 years old, I was attending a Hebrew school, which I would go to after school. But that was my first incident of anti-Jewish, so to speak. The second one, which is more exciting than that, I will tell you about in a little bit. When we moved to New Haven, it was a meaningful thing because my mother had a lot of brothers and sisters there, and they all had children, and everybody was very warm and friendly. And my sister and I were blessed, lucky. We grew up with no great problems. I had no connection to Israel while I was growing up in New Haven in high school, other than the fact that at the synagogue that we belonged to, which was a conservative synagogue, I was bar mitzvahed there, and I was confirmed there. And I remember how in 1945, when Israel was declared a state, how excited we were in our class, in our confirmation class, et cetera, et cetera. And growing up in New Haven was just fine. When I finished high school, I went to college. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, attended the Wharton School there. In high school, in answer to your question, what were my favorite subjects? My favorite subjects were Latin, which I took 4 years of, and history. What did I want to be when I grew up? I had no idea, no ambitions, no understanding of what I would do. I then went on to the University of Pennsylvania, as I mentioned, and at the University of Pennsylvania, I joined a fraternity. I had little or no communication with what is the Jewish?
Hillel. Hillel.
Hillel, none whatsoever. It just seemed that a Jewish fraternity filled my needs of being acquainted with Jewish kids. I did not participate in any heavy activities because I was busy sort of working my way through college. I washed dishes and I waited on tables. When I was growing up in New Haven, as a kid, I got a job as a good humor ice cream salesman. And I did that through my high school years. I had a little tricycle. I used to work, it was a 10-hour a day, but when you had no father and no money, you had to go to work, and I ultimately became a truck driver for Good Humor, and all those things helped me get through college. In college, I had a fraternity brother by the name of Bubba Mitchell, or Mayor Mitchell. Maybe Marilyn recognizes his name. He was the head of, help me, Marilyn.
APAC?
He was the head of APAC.
The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, APAC.
APAC, and I remember going to his installation as president at the occasion in Washington. Some of my friends in Greensboro were Leonard Kaplan, who ultimately became very close with friends with Bubba Mitchell, as you maybe know, Marilyn. Bernie Gutterman, who was the president of the Federation. Dick Forman, who was president at one time of the Temple, and a guy that I roomed with when I first came as a single man to Greensboro in 1957. I would go take a step back because you made a note about Linder. Murray Linder and I in New Haven were high school fraternity brothers together. Murray Linder's family had a bagel bakery on what I call the Jewish side of town. The bagel bakery was a 3 or 4 car garage, and that's where they did their baking every weekend. And occasionally when one of my friends had an automobile and we could go to the bagel bakery on Saturday night, we'd always stop and we'd always buy a bunch of bagels. And of course you'd eat 2 of them on the way home on a Saturday night. Eventually the bagel bakery people determined and found out how they could manufacture bagels, package them up, and sell them on a national basis. Murray Linder had a younger brother whose name I forget, but was very involved in
Marvin
Linder, very good. But anyway, one day when I was working here one Saturday, working in my office, my wife called and said, Murray Linder is here at the house, he wants to visit with you. As you might remember, some people came to Greensboro, a couple of couples came here with the idea of making a bagel bakery here in town. My wife was a real estate agent, so they looked her up, and they had difficulty in getting the funding to open up their bagel bakery. The person that accomplished it for them was a man by the name of Arthur Bleedenthal, who was a long-established guy in town who called the bank, and the bank gave them the financing they need. Anyway, we got to know Murray, spent a day or 2 with Murray. He was here introducing his daughter to UNCG. The daughter became very good friends with one of my daughters, and to this day we still see Harris Linder. She's married, lives in Virginia, and I think about 4 or 5 months ago she came here, spent an evening. Murray Linder, of course, is gone, but you mentioned it, and that's it. Murray Linder's brother also became popular on a national basis, and I know that he had a son that married an Israeli girl, etc., etc. But let me catch up to where I want to go on my notes now.
Joel, about Bubba Mitchell, was he from Alabama?
Bubba Mitchell was from Mobile, Alabama.
And he was one of your fraternity brothers.
He was one of my high school my college fraternity brothers. Yes.
Sounds like you were very involved in Jewish community leadership circles.
Well, yes, I am. Yes, in a way. I know Bubba was president of our fraternity, and I went to his wedding. I was one of the ushers at his wedding that was down in Atlanta, Georgia in 1953. When we graduated, he got married right away, and he and I remained in correspondence over the years. He came to Greensboro one time, I remember, after we had had our new Federation building. Leonard must have invited him up, and there's some occasion going on, I'm not sure what. Okay. After I went into the Army. After I graduated from college, I went into the Army and had a nondescript military career, took military police training, wound up eventually in the finance office. In my education, I was majored in accounting. The reason I majored in accounting was very simply I thought it was a very practical thing to learn at a business college. Anyway, when I was in the Army, I had one unpleasant incident because I was a Jew. There was a guy in our barracks who over time always ridiculed, always had nasty anti-Semitic things to say. I never paid much attention to him because the barracks was pretty good size. One night, I'll never forget this, he came over to me, stuck his face in front of mine, and said something nasty. I then became something I was never before, tough. I hauled off and I hit him. I knocked him down. He crawled away. He never came near me again. The next day, and he worked in the same finance office I did, I got a kick out of hearing somebody say to him, and I can't forget this, "What the hell's the matter with you? You let that big Jew knock you down." And that and an incident that I mentioned earlier in Washington were the only two anti-Semitic encounters I've had in the course of my life. And anyway, I moved here. I lived. Well, let me get things straight. I moved here as a single guy in 1957 with a chemical company from Connecticut. In 1958, I went back to New Haven, married Simone, and brought her down here.
Wait. Where did you meet her? How did that relationship
I met
start?
her. It was a very unusual. After I got out of the service, I worked for the chemical company in New Haven for 3 years before they asked me to come down here. I had a cousin. I bumped into a cousin of mine who said, "I've got a girl." They were very concerned. I was 26 years old and wasn't married. So my cousin Joni said, "I'll call you. I have a young lady I want you to date." So anyway, Simone and I dated in her senior year in college. And at that point in time, she was a little bit more serious than I was. So after 6 months of seeing each other a lot, we parted company. I came south. And then the story goes, my mother bumped into Simone in New Haven. And my mother called me one night and said, she and Francis met Simone, and Francis and I think Joel's nuts passing up on her. So anyway, I said, all right, Mom, when I get to New Haven next time, I'll call her. I did call her, and we went out 2 nights, and the second night we got engaged, and it was real 1, 2, 3 very fast, and I was lucky. I made a very good choice, and the marriage has worked out well, and I'm very thankful for that.
How many years are you married now?
We were married 66 years.
Wow.
When we moved to, anyway, I was here until 1967. In 1967, the company asked me to come back to Connecticut and take over the financial aspects of the company because the financial partner was going to retire. At that point, I did. We moved back to New Haven, and we moved back in time, and it was curious. We moved back to New Haven, but we were here negotiating to buy another house in Greensboro. We had a relatively small house, but with 3 kids, we thought we were ready to move into a bigger house. Anyway, I was called up to New Haven, and I remember shortly after I got to New Haven, the 1967 war in Israel broke out, and my mother and I went to the rally they had at the New Haven Arena, and one of my high school buddies, a man by the name of Stewie Grod, who was very friendly with Murray Linder, was the man who did the talking, etc., etc. So in the meantime, I made my first pledge that I can remember to Federation causes then. I'd saved up, or we'd saved up $2,000 while we lived here to buy a dining room set because we didn't have one. $2,000 today is not much money, but in 1967, it could have been in most instances a year's pay. So anyway, I donated that money at the rally. I came home and I told Simone. She looked at me and thought for a minute and said, okay. And that was that. I subsequently became very unhappy with what I was doing in New Haven and had to leave that company. The company sadly was at one point a wonderful company, but there were 2 partners, 2 brother-in-laws. They were different as night and day. They sort of fell apart, along with a son-in-law, and a very strong personality. So the company went down, and after I left them, a couple of years after I left them, they went into bankruptcy, and they were gone. Meanwhile, in New Haven, I needed to find a job. I put an ad in a chemical magazine looking for a job, and a man that I'd competed with, who you know, Phil Siegel, had a company called Worth Chemical Corporation. He had a split off from his company, and his company needed help, and they were not functioning well at all. So I came down here. He and I met. We had never been friendly while I was in Greensboro, but Simone said she knew his wife, and she was okay person, so Phil couldn't be bad. So anyway, we came. I bought an interest in the business and worked with him for 25 years until we sold the business. And it was a happy 25 years. I liked being involved in the community, and Greensboro was a very, actually, let me step back. When I first came to Greensboro, I remember the name of Dick Forman. Mm-hmm. Dick Forman and I were 2 bachelors in town that came at the same time. Mm-hmm. And when a newcomer back in the 50s came to Greensboro, people were very, very warm. And they took in the Tannenbaum woman, I forget her first name.
Leah Louise Tannenbaum.
She was very warm. A man by the name of Milton Weinstein, Larry Cohn, whose son was John Cohn, who was just immediate past president of the Federation, Joan and Arthur Bleedenthal, were all very warm, wonderful people. The difference between the 2 communities was enormous. It just seemed that the Jewish community in Greensboro was very prosperous. There were no first-generation Jews, or maybe a very few, whereas in New Haven, it was full of them. Anyway, I remember going to Israel in the 70s, and that was my first trip to Israel. And I, like everybody else, I fell in love with Israel and it became a very important part of my life. And I went back to Israel the year after. And then, remember Reed Rabin? Mm-hmm. We went to Israel with them and spent 2 weeks driving around and had the most wonderful trip. And there's Simone and I stood next to the Dome of the Rock. You can believe it, you can't get near there today, I'm sure, but we were there one afternoon. And Israel became very important to us, and that led me into the Federation. I did the campaign 1 year, and my goal was that we get $1 million. We didn't get that $1 million that year, but a few years later, when I was president of the Federation, we did reach that goal of $1 million. And I think Jerry Shapiro and he and Jerry, it was in 1987 that we hit that $1 million mark. And I think in my lifetime, if I let them stick around for a couple of more years, I will probably see the Federation hit $2 million. Anyway,
come back. I want to bring you back just a little bit.
Sure.
So you and Simone moved to Greensboro. You moved back to Greensboro, and you have several children, several daughters.
I have three daughters.
Tell us about them.
Yeah, and the three of them all wound up getting married, having children. We have 7 grandchildren, and now 3 great-grandchildren. And it's been a wonderful, it's been wonderful. I was president of the Federation when we had our embezzlement, which was a very difficult time. And I remember going with Mike Burkelhammer to tell our leader, Sherman Harris, that he was fired. He was canned after the embezzlement.
Tell us what happened.
Huh?
What happened, and what years were those?
This was in 1986 or 87. When did you come here, 87 or 88?
88, but came to interview.
And we had the embezzlement in 1987. Mm-hmm. And it was a shock. We terminated the director, and I came away with a lesson. The lesson is, and I tried to write it down, if something is not right, just because the previous people lived with it doesn't mean that you should live with it. In other words, I knew something wasn't right with this fellow Sherman Harris running it, but the people that preceded me were all very responsible people. They lived with what I call his shortcomings. His shortcomings also, I would wonder if he always told the truth. Mm. So anyway, he was gone, and the Federation, a lot of people stepped forward to help us run the Federation, and we managed to keep the Federation going. We had a campaign, we had our annual dinner, etc., etc. And we then had the good fortune to find somebody called Marilyn Chandler. I remember that Mike Burkelhammer had met her at a meeting up in New York or Connecticut at some point, and he suggested that we go, when we start our interview process, that we ask her to come down to be interviewed. Well, we did, and we liked her. We asked her, as I recall, to come down the second time, Marilyn, mm-hmm. and we hired her. And I think that the fact that we have a magnificent Federation now is really attributable to Marilyn's good efforts and everything. She was just been a wonderful, wonderful leader. Matter of fact, I think we probably have one of the more outstanding federations in the country, and I sit there amazed to see how it's grown and a number of people participating, and it makes me feel good inside for my participation in the Federation. And
so you were a campaign chairman. You were you were a campaign chairman. You were the president. You were a past president.
Yeah.
And you served on the board for many years. Yeah. And you still attend annual membership meetings.
It's very important to me. The first trip we made to Israel, although we had supported it in, as I mentioned, in 1967, but the first trip we made from here absolutely was overwhelming. And I don't go to the temple a lot. I'm not heavily religious, etc. But I'm very strong in my feeling for Israel and for being a Jew. And there's a lot going on now that amazes me. When we came home on Saturday night, I had a message from my dear friend Erwin Goldman. Turn on the television set. And that's when we saw what's going on there now. So all things considered, I'm a very lucky guy. I'm lucky that I married a fine woman, lucky that I came back to Greensboro, and have a lot to be thankful for. This community when I came here, I was amazed. It was a much more prosperous community than the community of New Haven. It just seemed that everybody here, there were integrated country club. The two country clubs had Jewish members. The temple was flourishing. The synagogue was in its very beginning. In the 50s, it was very, very small, and just really getting started. It's grown significantly since then. So I would just say that the Greensboro experience has been wonderful.
Joel, were you involved in the general community at all?
To a limited degree.
How?
I did serve on the United Way Board, the Conference of Christians and Jews, and in the chemical industry, I was served 2 years as president of the National Association of Chemical Distributors in the southern states, which kept me involved for a couple of years. I made a lot of good friends. I mentioned the name Leonard Kaplan. When I first came to Greensboro, someone said, there's a man in the chemical business in Greensboro, you ought to go meet him. And he was in High Point. I went to meet Leonard, and we went to lunch. And I never forget what he told me on the way to lunch. He just had one of those meetings of the Jewish community where all the guys get together and they solicit each other. And I forget what he called it. I'd never heard of anything like that. But living with him, getting to know Bernie, getting to know Dick Forman, Jerry Shapiro, a lot of nice people, Mike Berkelhammer. I have a lot to be thankful for, and I think we have a wonderful Jewish community, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Joel, talk to us about your family's involvement in philanthropy. How do you make those decisions about which organizations you support?
Well, I support the temple, of course. I support the Federation. And the United Way, I don't support them now. I used to. I do now support the organizations. There's two organizations that feed hungry people.
In Greensboro?
In Greensboro.
Like Urban Ministry?
No, not the. Yes, I do support the Urban Ministry, but that's the Urban Ministry is out of the church downtown, across from the temple. There's a program that we contribute to and go to a luncheon where it supports people who are down on their luck. And I get a lot of invitations in the mail to this. I support the museum in Washington, Hadassah.
You're talking about the Holocaust Museum in Washington?
The Holocaust Museum. We've been there, and we've been supporting them, not with giant amounts of money, but with money every year.
And what makes the difference for you about supporting organizations?
What's that?
How do you make the decision about what to support?
Very emotional. Jewish organizations, I tend to, World Jewish Congress, I give money to it. It's sort of hard when you're a Jew to turn down requests from Jewish organizations that are sound and sensible. In this day and age, every day in the mail there's requests for money for this, that, and the other thing. And I find it very hard not to support the Jewish ones. The other ones that are concerned with cancer and war veterans, et cetera, I don't feel it's necessary. I'm not moved as much to support them as I am the Jewish organizations.
So, do you think that your identity has been shaped, your personal identity has been shaped more from work, from your career, from different issues, or from some of the nonprofit work that you've been involved with? How was your identity shaped? As a Jew, as an individual?
Well, as a Jew, it goes back. It's amazing that I can remember anything that when I was 8 or 9, 10 years old. But I remember when the Norton twins told me that they didn't like the people that lived there in the house before. It was one of the duplexes in Washington. Taught them to hate Jews. That registered with me. And that one Jewish incident I had in the Army. Otherwise, I've absolutely suffered no discrimination. I worked for a Jewish chemical company. I was Jewish. I had no negative results of that. I had no other anti-Semitic encounters, so I was really lucky.
You mentioned a Jewish-owned chemical company.
Mm-hmm.
So were there other Jewish-owned businesses at the time? You spoke about Leonard Kaplan.
Well, in this area, well, I found that the Jewish community here was very prosperous compared to New Haven. There were a lot of lawyers, there were integrated country clubs. The merchants downtown, there was a store called Prego Guys, which was a big store downtown. The Jewish community was just seemed to be very much more successful and meaningful here, small, but very strong.
And talk to us about how you and Simone raised your daughters. Was Jewish community and Jewish identity important?
Not important enough. If I look back over it, because I was really not raised. I was raised to go to the temple, to go to the synagogue and bar mitzvah, but I didn't have the philosophical, strong interest that I probably should have. No, we raised our kids. They went to Sunday school at the temple, but none of them are very devout, and they're not very religious today. One daughter intermarried. I have one grandchild that's intermarried. But I don't think our experience is much different from most people in my generation. It's a lot of intermarriage, et cetera, et cetera. We still, I still, and we still identify as Jews very strongly, very proudly, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not a philosopher, and I'm not a great thinker. I'm more, how should I describe myself? More of a plain, down-to-earth.
Sounds like you're very humble and you have a great deal of humility.
I do. I've got a lot to be thankful for. And here I am, 94 years old, and still running around and having a good time. So I'm blessed. And what else can I say? I made a lot of notes. I spent a lot of time, and I just want to make sure I said everything.
Joel, do you think that your children are invested in Israel?
Well, yes, as a matter, yes. My oldest daughter, Wendy, has not been to Israel. My second daughter, Susie, is very interesting. She was a hard-working kind of kid. I remember she was working at a resort up in New York one summer, and I wanted her to go to Israel, and I had to talk her into it and lean on her to get her to go. She went to Israel, and she was seated. It was some Hadassah group or what, I don't know, but she sat next to a guy who she subsequently married. And his name was Liebling. He came from New Jersey. His father was a Holocaust survivor, and he and Susie met on this trip. Susie was going to school at that time up in the New Jersey area, and he was from New Jersey. And they had a romance and they got married. And he's a dentist, he's just retired. And I had the pleasure of knowing his father, who survived the Holocaust. And he can tell you some stories that really shake you up. And my third daughter, Pam, went to Israel, but Pam was not moved, and Pam intermarried. She has 3 kids, but she has very minimal, if any, Jewish identity. So my family experience is not vastly different from a lot of families that I know, that the intermarriage rate, you've seen what the intermarriage rate is. And we as a group of people, we Jews, we continue to thrive. We continue to have powerful organizations. You all probably get in the mail, just as I do, endless correspondence from brilliant Jewish people advocating this and wanting money for that, et cetera, et cetera. So we are well established. We have a Jewish governor here, we have a Jewish governor in Pennsylvania, so we Jews have arrived. And all this is very meaningful to me.
Joel, you mentioned the Holocaust several times in our conversation. Do you think that part of your involvement in Jewish community was in any way shaped by what happened in the Holocaust as well as Israel?
Of course.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, when you stop and think, and you read that 6 million Jews were killed, and you read countless stories on how Jews were killed this way and killed that way. The statue in town here. And I remember reading once pictures of Jews lined up, all lined up, and big holes in the ground, all lined up, and a German guy with a machine gun, whose job was to machine gun them, and they'd fall into. And what I remember reading that they stopped the machine gunning at one time, so the man could have lunch, the machine gunner. And when you read things like that, and you read the stories and you see pictures of the emaciated Jews that lived in that survived the Holocaust, yes, part of being our generation is that. I don't know what it's going to be with the generation of my kids or my grandchildren. But it's impacted me, and it impacted Simone. Yeah.
And we also spoke earlier about how your life was shaped by the many relationships and friendships that you had.
Yeah.
So, who do you think your role models? Who were your role models, and why? What was it about them that you admired?
Well, I admired all my friends, Bernie Gutterman, Leonard, Mike. I admired them all. And many other people in town that I met. We were very close with Joan and Arthur Bleetenthal, who were just absolutely wonderful people. You tend to feel good and thrive when you've got people you can look up to and respect. But I can't give you a big philosophical answer. I'm just not
That's okay.
philosophically oriented or. I would say one thing I didn't tell you, or maybe I did. Did I tell you when I was growing up, I was a good humor ice cream salesman? Yeah, that and washing dishes helped me get through college. And I'm lucky. I have a lot of positive things to look forward to. I do recognize that when you lose your father when you're 11 years old, it has an impact, and there's some shortcomings that are a result of that. But I was lucky. My mother's family was terrific. My aunts and uncles were all terrific. And I had two uncles during the war who were in the Pacific. And my grandfather, who I believe was born in Russia, who was in the real estate business, loved America. He used to write letters to my uncles full of patriotism, and he'd bring home a copy. And when my aunts would come to the house, as they did for dinner periodically, I'd have to stand up in front of them and read the letter that my grandfather wrote. So I had a lot of positive influences. Had we continued to live on in Washington, D.C., and my father had not passed away, my life probably would have been different.
So besides Holocaust and Israel, do you think that there were any other world or national events that have had an impact on your life? And if so, how?
Well, if they've had an impact on my life, it hasn't been an impact enough that I can tell you about it.
Okay.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And as our final question to you, and then you might have some questions or things that you might want to share. What do you think gives meaning to life? What gives meaning to life?
That's a very philosophical question. What gives meaning to life?
What has given you meaning in your life?
Well, one, a good marriage, a nice family, having grown up and lived in the Jewish community. That's all been all positive. I really, other than losing a father early on, I have complaints. I can't use the word complaints. I didn't have any misfortunes. But I was very fortunate to come back to Greensboro after I left my original company. Had a good business relationship and enjoyed the community, participated in the community, and I feel fulfilled. I feel now that yes, I did some right things. I had some good experiences. I don't really have any regrets now that I should have done this and I should have done that.
Do you feel like you made a difference?
Minimal, but thousands of people like me. Everybody contributing a little makes a difference. You'll read in this literature, I'm giving, I don't know why I saved it, but I was reviewing it and how this community came together after we terminated Sherman Harris. People stepped forward to do a lot of work, it was a lot helpful, and it was almost like a little bump in the road, but it wasn't the end of the Federation. We only grew stronger as a result of it. Sometimes you have to have a bad experience to learn something. You do something dumb in business, you sit and you say, boy, that was bad, where was my mind? You learn from your experiences. And I think this community has learned a lot from its experiences. And we were lucky enough to find Marilyn Chandler, who, I'll tell you, she made our community, made our federation.
And I just want to share that not only are you someone with a lot of humility, but you also have a lot of pride in what you were able to accomplish as a leader.
Yeah, well, yes, I participated, yes. And
because you went on more than one study mission to Israel.
Actually, we went, I don't know whether it was either 3 or 4. The last one was in 2018. And maybe we were a little old and we had certain things we wanted to do. So we left the mission for a couple of days to go, I don't remember to what. But Simone gave consideration to going on the mission that's coming up this fall, but she's decided she's too old and she couldn't keep going. But Israel, as a result of the first mission that we made in 1973 or 74, followed by the next year we went again, has impacted our life in a strong way. We had I would say I'm blessed. I had a lucky lifetime. Yeah.
Joel, we don't have any more formal questions for you, but is there anything that you would like to add to the interview?
No, I think I've said everything, and I'm just consider myself very lucky.
Joel, Stacy has a question for you.
Yes, Stacy.
So there will be future generations listening to this interview. Is there anything you would like to say to the future younger generations of Jewish people in the Greensboro area?
Yeah, tell them that they live in a unique town. The Jewish community in this town owes a lot to the Cohns who came here. When I first came here, I was floored by the fact that the Jews were so very much involved in the community, in country clubs. Jews were respected in this town. There were a minimal number of first-generation Jews. I don't think I've encountered any anti-Semitism in Greensboro, which is amazing. And I think that the Jewish people have to continue to be involved in this Greensboro city. I went to a city council. We have a Jewish man running for city council. Do you know him?
Andrew Marshall?
Yeah. Does he support the Federation?
I don't know.
It was very funny. We went to a rally for him, and Simone contributed to his plan, and the Hoffman woman is the one endorsing him, and she is very strong in her interest in Judaism, etc. I left that meeting. I knew his father was president of the temple at one point, but this man must be 40, 45 years old, and I don't see his name in the Jewish community. And I will have a hard time voting for him if he doesn't support the Federation.
Call him up and solicit him.
Well, first off, I'm going to call Glenda to find out if he contributes to the Federation. I'm not questioning whether he gets $1 or $1 million. That's not the point. It's the recognition of the Federation, the recognition of being Jews. You stop and think of the Jewish history. Here we are in Israel fighting for survival. But if you look back in history, we Jews have always been fighting. Always been fighting. Thousands, every story that there is about Jews were fighting. I've attended a class to discuss the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, the Pharaoh and the what did you call them,
With Moses, you mean?
the This is what happens when you get old. You
It's
forget
okay.
things. The plagues
Mm-hmm.
that came. But you go back, our whole history
Mm-hmm.
is we've always been fighting. Always in my lifetime and lifetimes before. The tragedy in our lifetime, we saw the worst of it. 6 million people killed because they were Jews. So that's why I don't have much use for a Jew that won't support a federation, as stupid as that sounds.
Sounds like
Do you understand why?
you want people to, and you have participated in the
Yeah, I want
Greensboro.
them to recognize the Jewish history
Mm.
and how lucky they are that they have survived.
It's a good question.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And
But it sounds like your involvement with the Federation, the Greensboro Jewish Federation, was because of Holocaust, because of Israel, because of anti-Semitism, and recognizing.
I don't know what the reason I just got involved. It seemed right. I liked what they were doing. I was a Jew. I had anti-Semitic experiences. That one experience in the Army, I can tell you, I had none in business whatsoever, which is amazing.
Mm.
Which is amazing. And I'm very proud of the one in the Army. I like telling the stories now. I never told that story until very recently. And
And you want young people in Greensboro to get involved.
I want Jewish people in Greensboro to be involved in the Jewish community. Do something, but recognize that the history of the Jews is tough, and we want to continue. We want to be concerned with the future for the Jewish people in this country, and we're lucky in this country, very lucky. So I'm not giving you anything of any great philosophical or whatever, but that's just me.
Thank you, Joel.
You're welcome.
Thank you.